Won't you take a breath with me? We begin with the words of the Reverend Manish Mishra Marzetti. Between rocking the boat and sitting down, between stirring things up and peaceably going along, we find ourselves here in community, each called from many different journeys, many different life paths onto this river road. Some are here because the rocking of the boat has been too much tumult, too much uncertainty, too much pain. Some are here with questions about where the boat is going, how best to steer it, where the journey ends. Others are here as lovers of the journey, lovers of life itself. Here in front, beside, behind, each a passenger, each a captain, doing the best we can. Rest here in your boat with me, the river calls. Listen to how I flow, the sound of life coursing all around you. Let the current hold you. Let the current guide you. The river that gently flows through your soul whispers, "Come, let us worship together."
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars? I know the truth, it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing?
If you have a chalice or candle to light, I invite you to prepare to light it at this time as I share these words of Annie Forster. Come we now out of the darkness of our unknowing and the dusk of our dreaming. Come we now from far places. Come we now into the twilight of our awakening and the reflection of our gathering. Come we now all together. We bring, unilluminated, our dark caves of doubting. We seek, unbedazzled, the clear light of understanding. May the sparks of our joining kindle our resolve, brighten our spirits, reflect our love, and unshadow our days. Come we now enter the dawning.
I invite you now to join me in saying our covenant words together, first in English and then in Spanish. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, thus do we covenant. La doctrina de esta iglesia es el amor. La búsqueda de la verdad es su sacramento y el servicio es su oración. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar el conocimiento en libertad, servir a la humanidad en comunión. Este es nuestro pacto.
I'm Todd Covert, and it's my privilege to serve as worship associate this morning and welcome you to Emerson Unitarian Universalist Church's 80th virtual service since the onset of the COVID pandemic. Indeed, it has now been 18 months since we last held a service in our sanctuary in Canoga Park. If we had put a pool on how long we'd be away from our physical home, I wonder how many people at that time would have put money on more than a year and a half. If you had to make a prediction now, would you bet on another 18 months? Today's service, led by our settled minister, Reverend Matthew McHale, touches on expectations and frustrations as our beloved community continues to gather here in cyberspace. Whether here in Zoom or in our physical church, located in a community sited on lands appropriated from the Chumash and Tongva peoples, Emerson has been a home for inclusive and socially conscious spirituality in the San Fernando Valley for more than 65 years. We are a welcoming community that embraces all who come to us with an open mind and an open heart, regardless of race or ethnicity, gender expression or affectional preference, age, ability, or any other marker of diversity. To our members and friends joining us this morning, I extend a welcome and a thanks for your continued support. If you're new to worship at Emerson, welcome. We're very glad you're here. I'd like to call your attention to the information posted in the chat box here in Zoom. Included in it is a link to add your email address to our email list if you'd like to receive our newsletter, which not only includes worship service announcements, but also information about other online programming Emerson is offering while we continue to join away from our physical church. Also included in the chat is a link to our online book of life, where you can add a joy or concern to be shared aloud during the service this morning. And if you'd like to get to know us better as a newcomer, and we hope you will, there's a virtual coffee hour here in Zoom after the service. Just stick around. We'll go into breakout rooms for some sociability. And with that, let me turn the virtual pulpit back over to Reverend Matthew for a story for all ages.
Good morning. It is good to be with you all this morning. This morning, I have a story that comes out of the Jewish scriptures. Some of you may be familiar with what comes earlier. That may be very familiar with it, the story of the Israelites who had been slaves in Egypt under the Pharaoh, where they were forced to do very hard work and then escaped, led by Moses. And oftentimes that's where the story that we're told ends. That's the story that's told on Passover every year. But there's a whole other part of the story that comes after the Red Sea has been parted and then they escape to the other side. And that's what we're going to hear today. And so the Israelites, led by Moses, fled into the desert to look for a land where they could be free and start their new lives. And Miriam, Moses' sister, took a tambourine and started dancing and singing, and then other women joined in the dancing, and soon everyone was singing and dancing as they celebrated their new freedom. But it turns out things weren't easy in the desert either. And after a few days, the people complained to Moses, "We are thirsty. We have no water to drink in this desert." And so God tells Moses to strike a rock with his staff. And when Moses does, a stream of water pours out of the rock. And the people filled their cups with water, and their thirst was quenched. But then they said to Moses, "We are hungry. Moses, why did you bring us out of Egypt just to starve us to death?" And hearing that, God makes this delicious food called manna to fall from the sky, to fall from heaven. And so the people gathered up the manna and they ate it. But as good as the manna tasted, the Israelites got tired of eating manna day after day, and they complained. "Manna from heaven for dinner again? Moses, why can't we have something different for a change?" Well, Moses was getting tired of how ungrateful his people were. He was trying his best, after all. But the people were tired too. And they weren't sure if they should trust Moses or God, who had led them into the desert where things were so hard now. Some considered turning back and heading back to Egypt, where at least they knew what life was going to be like, even if it was hard. And others started worshiping a gold statue of a calf. And things were hard in the desert. And it turns out that they ended up wandering in the wilderness of the desert for 40 years. I mean, that's longer than I've been alive. 40 years before they found a new land to call their home. But during their 40 years of wandering, over time they learned to trust each other and to listen to each other and to give thanks for what they had, even when everything else was hard. And they sang and they danced and made music together. And they grew closer to each other. And when they finally crossed into that promised land 40 years later, they were a stronger community than they had been when they started out. A community that had been transformed. Now, we haven't been wandering the desert for 40 years. We've mostly been stuck in our homes for 18 months. But it's been a hard time for us in many different ways, and we've faced a lot of different challenges. But one of the things we've done is come together in community to support each other, to care for each other, to celebrate each other's joys and comfort each other when things are kind of hard. And so as hard as these 18 months have been, I'm hopeful that when we come through this, we come through it transformed into a community that has become stronger by what it has been through together. I invite you now to join me in saying our children's affirmation and to do the hand motions if you know them. We are Unitarian Universalists, a people of open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. And now let's hear the song Lost in the Wilderness from the musical Children of Eden.
I never made this world, I didn't even lose it. And I know no one said it was fair, but they had a garden once, they had a chance to choose it. They gave it away, including my share. And now we're lost in the wilderness, lost, crying in the wilderness. And if anyone's watching, it seems that we couldn't care less. We're lost in the wilderness. Only you follow all the rules, you swallow all the stories, and every night you wish on a star. And dreaming the day will come, trusting in allegories. And every morning, boy, look where you are. You are lost in the wilderness, lost, slowly dying in the wilderness, with no chance of living, boy, until you confess you're lost in the wilderness. Don't you ever watch the eagle fly to the sun and wonder how it got to be so free? If you ever have, you know your journey's begun. Say, what do you gotta lose, boy? Headed, boy, I couldn't guess, but off we go without a warning, running as we hit the ground, where our future lies in mourning, where our hearts are outward bound, till one bright and distant morning, may we stop and look around, and there in the wilderness, finally we will be found. Don't you ever watch the eagle fly to the sun? Wonder how it got to be so free.
So while we're waiting, I'd like to share a couple brief anecdotes with you. The first happened only last week. As many, maybe most of you are aware, I'm a member of Emerson's Board of Trustees. At our board meeting last Monday, we were grappling with the question of when and how we can return to in-person worship services presumably with a live streaming component so people can still join us virtually. We discussed how and when and under what conditions we might move toward in-person attendance, who might have to be excluded from participation in the sanctuary based on vaccination status or other factors. That prompted a brief discussion about the relative effectiveness of this virtual worship we've been engaged in for a year and a half now. I found myself reacting to the suggestion that Zoom worship was equivalent to, or maybe even in some senses preferable to in-person worship. I hate it, I said. I hate it. This very medium through which I'm speaking to you now and helping to lead today's worship service. Reflecting on it afterwards, I recognized that there was even a level of anger behind my reaction. Why? What is it about this continued forced participation in virtual worship that prompted such a negative reaction in me? So this second story. 1996. On the weekend of the summer solstice, late in the evening, after the sun had finally set, I stood in a clearing on a ridge in the Angeles National Forest. I was surrounded by 40 other people, all gathered for a weekend pagan retreat. And I led those 40 people standing in a circle there in the starry mountain night in a ritual honoring the solstice. I raised energy with them. I led them in an incantation seeking inspiration. And with them, I raised and then dismissed a sacred circle. And I hoped that we had somehow together wrought something precious. But more than that, I hope that I just helped to bring some touch of the mysterious and the infinite into their lives, even just for the space of those few minutes. Looking back on what was, in fact, my first public ritual that I had ever led, I know there were nerves and mistakes, but I also know that I was affecting those people. Now, maybe some were bored. I'd like to think that some were excited, and maybe some were even truly inspired. But regardless of what each of our individual experiences might have been, we were all there together, living that moment together and sending messages, both spoken and unspoken, to each other throughout that time. In the 25 years since that night on the mountaintop, I've been in and out of various religious paths and communities, including Unitarian Universalism. But I always find myself looking for settings where people can join in sacred space, for sacred purpose, to reach out ever so cautiously to one another in the sanctity and the safety of that space, to try to build connection and to try to foster by collective effort a deeper spiritual presence in each other's lives. We've been kept away from the ability to physically meet in that way, to be present with each other and influence each other in the moment. I'll be honest, I miss our custom of reaching out and joining hands or putting a hand on the shoulder at the end of the service so that each and every person in the sanctuary becomes physically connected one to the other. I long for the taking of hands, the joining as one, the comfort, the support, and the connection that that simple gesture provides. And yet I know that we may not soon find our way back to it. And so while we wait to see what the future holds, we create these virtual rituals to serve our ongoing need to connect. And our love and our care for each other and this beloved community keeps me, you, all of us coming together for virtual worship.
Going through all that we have been through over the past 18 months, as Todd got at in his reflection, has been a lot for us, and we find ourselves maybe reaching the end of our reserves or holding in a lot of stress or trauma. And one of the places that we hold that is actually in our body. Like we hold stress in our bodies. And so one of the ways we can help to move through that is to engage in practices that help us become more aware of what's happening, what's going on in our bodies. And so in that spirit, I offer this embodied meditation. Now, please remember that this is just an invitation. If anything feels uncomfortable to you or your body doesn't want to, please don't. This meditation is for you. So I invite you to get comfortable wherever you are. Could be sitting down or lying on the floor. And as you turn your attention to your body, let your attention soften to just notice what is. Beginning with your feet, just notice what your feet are connected to. What parts of your feet touch the ground or chair or your own leg? Notice the contact of your body with the chair or the floor. How do those places that touch feel? Notice, but don't change your breathing. Notice if it's deep or shallow, or any way you could describe the rhythm of air in and out of your body. And then turn your attention to what's around you. Look around or listen. Let your gaze and ears softly take in the world. What are your eyes or ears drawn to? Notice the details of what you're seeing or hearing. And then slowly turn your head and notice what else you're drawn to. And now again, notice your breath. How is your breathing now? How is it the same? How has it changed? And when you're ready, I invite you to turn your attention back to this moment, this time and place. Into the space that we share together.
Hey, don't write yourself off yet. It's only in your head you feel left out or looked down on. Just try your best. Try everything you can. And don't worry what they tell themselves when you're away. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright. Hey, you know they're all the same. You know you're doing better on your own, so don't buy in. Live right now. Just be yourself. It doesn't matter if it's good enough for someone else. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright. Hey, don't write yourself off yet. It's only in your head you feel left out or looked down on. Just do your best. Do everything you can. And don't worry what the bitter hearts are gonna say. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright. everything, everything will be just fine. Everything, everything will be alright.
At the beginning of the pandemic, one of the most watched movies in the country was an old film from 2011, Contagion, a scientifically grounded film about a global pandemic that eerily mirrored our reality. A virus originating from China, social distancing, are not values, panic buying, school closings. Now, I only just got around to watching it, and 18 months later, it still gets so much right that it almost felt more like a documentary than a big Hollywood movie. And it's kind of odd that so many people would want to watch a film where 27 million people are killed by a virus in just 35 days. It's a harrowing film, but in its own way, it's also comforting. Thanks to heroic work by scientists, researchers, and public health officials, a vaccine is quickly developed. And in fact, slightly too quickly, even faster than our incredibly rapid vaccine. One of the few things that doesn't get quite right. But while many people have to wait a while to get vaccinated, eventually people get to go back to their lives. And that's where the story ends. While Contagion captures the panic, the fear, the chaos during the virus's early spread, it turns into a film primarily about the development of the vaccine. So as true to life as it ends up being, it's not really concerned with the waiting and the background hum of fear and anxiety and stress that all of us have lived with. Living through this pandemic has taken a toll on us, but through it all, we always had the vaccination to look forward to. Like in the movie, that's where this was supposed to end. Everyone eventually gets vaccinated. We mourn our losses and get back to living our lives. But in the movie, there are no anti-maskers or anti-vaxxers. The closest thing is a conspiracy theorist blogger who gets rich by promoting a fake cure. And in the end, presumably everyone gets vaccinated. I mean, why wouldn't you from a disease that kills 25 to 30% of the population who get it? And that's the movie a lot of us thought we were in. People were going out to dinner and shows again, and traveling and socializing in person, sometimes awkwardly, and having a hot vax summer. But then, sometime in July, things started to shift. Vaccinations slowed, and the Delta variant spread rapidly, leading to the second biggest surge we've seen thus far. And that's what we weren't prepared for. You know, throughout this pandemic, I was never optimistic that this would be over soon. In March 2020, I knew we would be socially distancing at least until June. By April, I knew we wouldn't be together before the fall. And by June, I realized it could easily take at least another year. And knowing that made it easier to mentally prepare for the wait. And then the vaccine was announced, and people started getting vaccinated. The news of each person I knew getting the shot was cause for a small celebration. I felt the greatest sense of relief when my parents were fully vaccinated, and I started to hope. And then I got my first shot in April, and that hope grew. And by May, we were planning to be worshiping in person together in September. I'd started thinking about this sermon way back in June, thinking about what message I wanted to offer the congregation this fall as we began to put the pandemic behind us. And what I wanted to talk about was how traumatic an experience this had been to live through in so many different ways. And that even though we were out of the pandemic, that we would still need to process all that we had been through. Of course, we're not out of this pandemic, and we really don't have a sense of when we will be anymore. So it's no longer about the trauma of what we've been through, but what we're still going through. You know, at the beginning of the summer, a lot of us were feeling relieved, overjoyed even, to be finally coming out of this pandemic. Gallup classified almost 60% of Americans as thriving based on their responses to a survey that asked them to evaluate their lives, the highest average score on that measure in 13 years. So that sudden turnabout has made the stress and overwhelm from this latest wave of COVID that much harder to cope with. In their Washington Post article, Why This Stage of the Pandemic Makes Us So Anxious, Amy Cuddy and Jill Ellen Riley write, "People are awash with conflicting feelings as they grapple with the swings and mixed signals of threats, shifting public health policies, and uncertain social behavior." Conversely, write Cuddy and Riley, some people feel ashamed and guilty because they think they should be feeling happy when in fact they're sad to be losing pandemic routines that were reducing their stress and that had come to matter to them. And so this struggle and stress might be manifesting itself in different ways in us. Insomnia, detachment, brain fog, anxiety, depression, irritability, and anger. These last two seem to be very obviously on the rise again. And that's because chronic stress can make it harder for us to regulate our emotions like anger. And there's so much anger. People mad about having to wear a mask. Others mad at those who are unvaccinated for dragging out this pandemic and putting those who are immunocompromised or can't get vaccinated yet at greater risk. I've heard it in our conversations among folks at Emerson and elsewhere. Well, if they don't want to get vaccinated, I don't really care what happens to them. But that's our hurt, our pain, our frustration, our trauma speaking. You know, I'll admit that I've had those thoughts too, and it doesn't feel great. It's not rooted in our UU values, which call on us to value the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And moreover, if you want to reach those who are vaccine hesitant, showing compassion is much more effective, always. So getting pissed off might help us blow off steam, but it isn't going to make us feel better in the long run. Instead, it's caring for our mental health, our spiritual health, our physical health, just as we have been called to do throughout this whole pandemic. Now, I know I've encouraged self-care so many times during this pandemic that I'm starting to feel like a broken record. Do yoga, garden, catch up with friends, stop reading the news, talk to a therapist, go for a walk, meditate, make art. But I really think that self-care may be even more important now, where we've entered this period of flux, where we really don't know when all this will end. And this struggling with challenges we don't know when or if will end finds its parallels elsewhere. It's similar to what it's like to live with a serious illness or disability. Kate Bowler, a theologian and professor who received a stage 4 cancer diagnosis at the age of 35, and wrote a book about it called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. Well, 6 years later, she's still surviving, and just this week was the guest on the podcast On Being, where she talked about the difficulty of moving from the crisis condition, where there's all this initial energy and hopefully support, and into a chronic condition. She says, you have to learn to live here, the way this is, much closer to the edge, where it doesn't really feel exactly like a knife's edge anymore. It feels sort of like you're asked to build a tiny home on the side of a cliff. And you know, a natural disaster might come by, but you're really checking the weather a lot. She continues, now that we know that life can come apart in an instant, then how do we live like this? And she truly has some wonderful, hard-won wisdom, and I don't have time to share it all with you this morning. So I encourage you to go check out the On Being podcast. Again, it's the episode from this week. Just came out, I think, on Thursday. But one of the biggest lessons that she shares was recognizing that we don't really have control over our lives. Life, she says, is these ridiculous, gorgeous, terrible binaries that we have to put up side by side. The feeling of seeing a baby being born, and then the feeling of holding someone's hand when they pass. What we call the numinous, the drawing up close to the realness of life. She talks about being thankful for this absurd wonder and the privilege of being in this body and loving the people I love and getting a shot at doing it again. And then also structural inequality and crushing medical debt and cancer. And having it all up close together. That seems to me to be the big challenge of all of this, she says, is widening our little aperture so we can see the reality of both without missing one or the other. I also see that concept reflected in the Black folks who've been lifting up Black joy. In 2015, the writer and activist Cleaver Cruz was exhausted by being bombarded by instances of Black death and pain in his community and all around the country. And so he founded the Black Joy Project to lift up examples of Black joy and to share them. Black people dancing with friends or at protests, cooking delicious meals, graduating from college, bursting out with infectious laughter. And the sharing of Black joy is meant to be a source of healing and community building. He says it's about using that joy as an entry into understanding the oppressive forces we navigate through as a means to imagine and create a world free of them. And so this living through things, trying to cope with things that we don't know will end, is not new, although this is probably the biggest instance of the most people being affected by the same thing at the same time in human history. But it's not the first time people have had to live through hardship that seemingly will not end. You know, Black and Indigenous people have been dealing with systemic racism and white supremacy for over 500 years on this continent. Oppression that continues. And the heat waves and wildfires and droughts caused by climate change are the beginning of what we will be living with for the rest of our lives. And so not just for this pandemic, we need to learn how to live with that wide open aperture, being able to see both the joy and the beauty and the wonder of life as well as its struggles, so that we can respond to it. Because this pandemic, in a few months or a few years, or maybe even a few decades, will be over at some point, or will at least transform into something that's kind of at such a low hum that it won't occupy so much of our time and energy and emotion. But this is something that we need to learn to live with in different situations. And so take care of yourself, friends, to do those activities that care for your mental well-being, your spiritual well-being, your physical well-being. To seek out that joy, that beauty, that wonder, even in the midst of all of the loss and the suffering. Right there is one of the profoundest and also most challenging lessons that life has to teach us. May we listen to what life has to teach us. Our closing hymn this morning is Woyaya, a song by Sol Amarfio, lyrics by Annie Masembe. And Woyaya means we are going in the Ga language of Ghana. And I picked the song kind of not knowing that I was going to go the direction, I was going to end on the direction of finding that joy. And it's not really a song about joy, it's a song about keeping going and going together and trusting in the process. But there is joy to be found in the song, and that joy comes from the singing together in community and singing through the struggle. And so with that spirit, I invite you to sing or just to listen to Woyaya, this version performed by Leah Morris and the Silver Springs UU Church.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will. We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know we're there, we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know we're there, we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. know we will. We are growing. Heaven knows where we are going. We'll know we're there. Oh yeah, yeah. 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 We'll know we're there.
And we extinguish our chalice. Here, we find meaning in community. We find love in moments, in music, in the struggle. We find joy in making it up as we go. Here, we grieve together, laugh together, and heal together. We rage together, fight for justice together. We find good trouble together. We keep going together. Blessed are we all. Go in peace.